Лукашенко должны немедленно извиниться перед Литвой, притом публично за это. Ну и же пошли нах и так далее.
The foundations of the Kremlin's western edifice are not merely shaking. They are experiencing a total synchronized collapse under the pressure of two distinct yet perfectly intertwined crises. One is loud, a cacophony of panic and bluster emanating from Moscow. The other is chillingly silent, a cold, deadly suffocation aimed squarely at the Russian heart in Europe. This is not happenstance. This is a meticulously orchestrated two-pronged annihilation strategy targeting Vladimir Putin's most prized geopolitical assets. Let us first dissect the silent, deadly blow, the strangulation of Kaliningrad. For years, the narrative crafted by the Kremlin for the Russian populace painted Kaliningrad as the ultimate symbol of Russian might in the West. It was consistently peddled as our fortress embedded deep within the European continent, our unsinkable aircraft carrier facing the Atlantic, and crucially, the dagger plunged into the flank of NATO. This exclave housed the Baltic fleet touted as an invincible bastion bristling with nuclear-capable Iskander missiles. Yet this supposed fortress harbored one almost farcical Achilles' heel: logistics. Examine any map, and the truth becomes starkly apparent. This territorial protrusion is in essence an island. Russia maintains no contiguous land bridge connecting it to the Russian mainland. Everything, the vital flow of fuel, the replenishment of military material, even basic foodstuffs, was critically dependent on railway transit traversing NATO member Lithuania. That single railway corridor was quite literally Kaliningrad's only artery to the outside world. And then on the 31st of October, 2025, Lithuania severed that lifeline. The official pronouncement from Vilnius was deceptively bureaucratic: Lithuanian Railways will institute a complete prohibition on the transit of petroleum derivatives belonging to the Russian oil behemoths Lukoil and Rosneft, effective November the 21st. The question screams for an answer. Why this timing? And why does this iteration possess such finality unlike previous European sanctions? The answer lies in a perfectly executed legal maneuver, the masterful application of NATO's new generation deterrence doctrine. The entire mechanism began to crank into motion on the 23rd and 24th of October, when the United States Department of the Treasury, specifically the Office of Foreign Assets Control OFAC, alongside the United Kingdom, jointly unveiled secondary sanctions targeting Russia's two largest energy titans, the state-controlled Rosneft and the supposedly independent Lukoil. These two entities represent the colossal pillars of Russian crude oil exportation, accounting, I estimate, for nearly one-half of all Russian crude shipments globally. We are speaking undeniably of the heaviest hitters in Moscow's financial arsenal. What does this technical designation of secondary sanctions truly signify? Let us translate this into blunt terms. Secondary sanctions dictate that any entity, any financial institution, globally conducting transactions with the sanctioned companies, Lukoil or Rosneft, will be summarily ejected from the dollar and sterling financial ecosystems. Their access to legitimate international finance will be summarily terminated. This punitive measure was engineered with pinpoint accuracy to impact Lithuania directly. Why? Because the entity responsible for ferrying that essential oil cargo to Kaliningrad was critically the Lithuanian state railway system. Suddenly, Lithuania, a full-fledged member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was cornered, presented with an impossible ultimatum. Option 1, persist in facilitating the flow of fuel to Putin's Baltic fleet stronghold and in return face financial isolation alongside recognized state sponsors of terror by the US and UK, guaranteeing national bankruptcy. Option 2, acquiesce to the sanctions, immediately choke off the flow and ensure national economic survival. The response was delivered on the 31st of October. LTG, the Lithuanian railway operator, publicly stated adherence to the sanctions mandate, setting November the 21st as the hard deadline. Now let us examine the sheer weight of this logistical amputation. In 2024 alone, LTG transported precisely 371,000 tons of refined petroleum products into Kaliningrad. Of that total 345,000 tons, virtually the entire quantity belonged to Lukoil, which now resides squarely on the sanctions blacklist. This is the essential civilian fuel for Kaliningrad's survival. More critically, this is the very lifeblood for the tanks, the naval vessels, and the jet fuel reserves sustaining Putin's Baltic fleet fortress. On November the 21st, this vital circulatory flow ceases entirely. Can Putin retaliate with military force? Recall that when the European Union first imposed sanctions back in 2022, Putin unleashed a torrent of threats, bluster, and veiled aggression, compelling Germany, among others, to retreat in trepidation. But this time, there is no political body in Brussels capable of interceding on his behalf. Facing him is an economic death warrant issued by the US Treasury. Whom exactly should he invade over a bank, transfer Putin's array of tanks and ballistic missiles, suddenly prove utterly irrelevant when confronted by a signed OFAC sanctions decree. This episode exposes the profound impotence of the military doctrine he so proudly marketed as invincible to the Russian people when placed against the cold reality of 21st century financial warfare. So what recourse does the Kremlin possess? Now, can they pivot, declaring, "Fine, if the rails are blocked, we shall employ overland transport via Belarus using heavy trucks"? The second simultaneous blow orchestrated by this operation provides a definitive answer to that very question. Putin's contingency plan, Plan B, has also been meticulously neutralized. The land bridge is effectively erased. Concurrent with the news of the oil embargo fracturing the rail route, Lithuanian and Polish forces were executing another operation along the Belarusian border. The infamous balloon crisis erupted. These are the crude, often cigarette-smuggling balloons deployed by Minsk to introduce chaos and foment a low-grade hybrid crisis across the border. In previous instances, Vilnius exhibited a degree of tolerance, perhaps viewing it as minor nuisance. That era concluded abruptly. Recall how the Lithuanian Prime Minister and President categorized these balloons as an explicit threat to national security and a calculated act of hybrid warfare. And on the 27th of October, leveraging this manufactured hybrid conflict as the perfect pretext, Lithuania announced the immediate temporary closure of its border checkpoints with Belarus. This action followed a preceding sequence of air traffic disruptions. Lithuania had already indefinitely shuttered its final two crucial land crossings with Belarus Medininkai and Shalchininkai. Poland swiftly mirrored this action, sealing its own borders. Are you beginning to see the architect behind this hybrid attack? It is none other than Alexander Lukashenko himself. Information authenticated yesterday by Polish opposition leader Paweł Łatuszka confirms that Lukashenko personally admitted to being in contact with the smuggling rings infiltrating Lithuania, further conceding that the border committee intentionally turned a blind eye to these illicit activities. Behold the perfection of the trap. This is flawless coordination executed on two fronts. On one flank, Kaliningrad U.S. secondary sanctions have choked off oil transit via rail. On the opposing flank, Belarus, the hybrid attack balloons in action implicitly admitted by Lukashenko, provided the necessary legal and political justification to entirely sever ground transit access to NATO territory. Kaliningrad is now denied both fuel and a land connection. Putin's contingency truck supplies through Belarus has been obliterated simultaneously with his primary route via Lithuania. Putin's ostensibly impregnable western fortress has instantaneously transformed into a fuel-starved, geographically isolated, and utterly defenseless enclosure. Putin has, with his own operational negligence, effectively imprisoned his own Baltic Fleet stronghold. This sequence illustrates the grim reality of how Putin, the man who promised the Russian people a resurgent Great Russia and boasted that he had brought NATO to its knees, has forfeited his final piece of continental Europe without a single shot being fired in anger. However, the closing of this calculated trap did not solely ensnare Kaliningrad. It also caught Putin's last remaining vassal Lukashenko in the same snare. Now we must widen the lens to appreciate the full scope of the operation. Why is Lukashenko exhibiting such visible, almost frantic panic? Why the torrent of hysterical pronouncements? Observe the visual evidence. He is clearly operating under extreme duress, but the root cause demands analysis. We mapped this out months ago. Lukashenko harbored a clandestine ambition, the grand bargain. Sensing Putin's increasingly precarious position in Ukraine, Lukashenko dreamed of engineering a dramatic leap from a sinking ship, betraying Putin, and securing a secret accord with the United States to salvage his own regime. He admitted to this desire openly. These are his own recorded utterances confirming this aspiration. This entire dream of a geopolitical hedge, this planned act of betrayal, detonated on the 27th of October. For that plan to succeed, it required one fundamental component: open access points to the west, specifically the sovereign borders managed by Poland and Lithuania. His nation's economy, his personal escape route to the west, all depended upon those gates remaining unlocked. And between the 27th and 29th of October, those final exit avenues were slammed shut courtesy of the very balloons he utilized. While Lukashenko plotted his defection from Putin, he suddenly discovered himself locked in the same containment cell as his master. Consequently, on the 31st of October, he appeared before the media, a portrait of barely contained hysteria. This was not a display of strength. It was a public confession of his failed gambit. As Belarusian opposition leader Paweł Watuszka shrewdly noted, Lukashenko comprehended that the grand bargain he envisioned, trading political hostages for sanctions relief, was a phantom deal. The West demanded substantive, verifiable regime change, and Lukashenko had walked directly into an inescapable net. Trapped, he attempted one final desperate throw of the dice. He publicly admitted to having engaged in secret negotiations with Poland, claiming he had desperately begged them. Lukashenko stated that Poland's most prominent political prisoner held hostage in Belarus was a matter of supreme national importance to Warsaw. He offered this most valuable piece of leverage, this human shield, to Poland. What did he seek in return? Peace. Security guarantees, simply the opening of one single border crossing. Can you grasp the gravity of this proposition? A sitting national leader is offering his most strategic political captive merely to regain basic economic transit? This is not negotiation, this is supplication. And what was the response from Poland? A frontline NATO member: silence followed by rejection. Poland utilized the pretext of the balloon incursions and national security concerns to refuse even the parley, declining to accept the offered hostage, Paweł Watuszka. The implication is devastatingly clear. Lukashenko's leverage is precisely zero. He is reduced to begging. His strategy for an amicable exit to the West, his elaborate grand bargain, has disintegrated entirely. What followed was a predictable descent into chaos. In his evident desperation, Lukashenko suffered what can only be described as a visible mental breakdown. According to reports from Nexta, Lukashenko went so far as to demand a public apology from the Americans concerning the balloon surveillance. His retort, in his own words: "This is not a demonstration of power. It is the raw, ragged scream of a cornered animal lashing out at the very external powers with whom he sought a lucrative final deal." He compounded this error by aggressively blaming the Lithuanians for the escalation, presenting the utterly baseless claim that Lukashenko, has exhausted every viable card against the West. He can no longer betray Putin and secure his escape. He is no longer a reliable partner to Moscow. He is now simply another hostage being asphyxiated alongside Putin. The realization that Putin could not even shield his closest satellite state from NATO's coordinated economic and logistical pressure signals the absolute final collapse of that hollow construct euphemistically termed the Union State. The Russian populace is witnessing in real time how their leadership fails to secure even their most intimate ally, how both are now thoroughly ensnared. Lukashenko's compromised status is vividly reflected in the incoherent, contradictory nature of his recent public addresses. On one hand, he desperately pleads with the West for economic survival. On the other, he spouts the most nonsensical and contradictory rhetoric designed solely to reaffirm fealty to Putin. Consider the first contradiction: the nuclear posturing. While simultaneously seeking rapprochement with the West, he issues bellicose threats. He implicates Ukraine as the true originator of the Donbass conflict, champions the narrative of persecuted Russian speakers, and most alarmingly confirms that Russia's hypersonic Kinzhal missile will achieve operational readiness by December. This is Putin using Lukashenko as a proxy megaphone to project nuclear intimidation toward NATO. Consider the second contradiction: the Suwalki nightmare. In the very same statements where he brandishes the nuclear specter, he simultaneously issues a confession of profound fear. He stated implicitly, meaning, "Please do not attack us. We harbor no aggressive intentions." This is undeniable evidence that NATO's Phase Zero deterrent concept is functioning exactly as intended, that the threat of immediate consequence is paralyzing offensive planning. And finally, the third contradiction: economic distress versus ideological hatred. Lukashenko, whose regime faces imminent economic strangulation due to the closed borders, sputters vitriolic hatred toward Europe, proclaiming, "I never wanted your trade anyway." This chaotic tapestry of contradiction, begging one moment, threatening the next, broadcasts a singular message to the world and crucially to the Russian elites: the Union State is an impotent facade and its leader is experiencing a catastrophic psychological erosion. Putin's ally has devolved into an unpredictable, desperate, and frankly dangerous buffoon. So what lies beneath the surface of this perfectly synchronized, ruthless, and impeccably timed series of NATO actions? Why the immediacy? The key to unlocking this entire operation was revealed just 24 hours after these events, culminated buried within a document leaked on the 1st of November. This is the Rosetta Stone connecting every strategic piece. The war in the Western theater has already commenced. This is not a mere contingency exercise, it is the execution of a war plan. NATO's Supreme Allied Commander for Europe, General Christopher Cavoli, presented a monumental 4,400-page comprehensive defense concept to the 32-member alliance. Its title, the Eastern Flank Deterrence Line Concept. The operative term embedded within is Phase Zero. As a former NATO general explained to Die Welt newspaper, once the war in Ukraine concludes, the potential for a direct Russian assault will reach its absolute zenith. We are already operating within Phase Zero. Do you grasp the implication? Putin assumed his invasion of Ukraine would force NATO into a defensive posture, pushing them back. He achieved the precise inverse. His aggression served as the adrenaline shot that jolted NATO out of its 3-decade slumber. As the head of Estonian foreign intelligence observed, the troop deployments Russia has concentrated along the border drastically compressed the warning timeline available to NATO. NATO's new comprehensive 4,400-page doctrine now mandates a posture of proactive, preemptive defense, replacing the outdated model of merely reactive response. Phase Zero means foregoing the luxury of waiting for the first shot to be fired. It mandates crippling the enemy's logistics, their economic underpinnings, and their strategic allies before hostilities can even begin in earnest. Now revisit the actions against Kaliningrad and Belarus through this lens. This is Phase Zero in action. Cutting Kaliningrad's fuel supply via secondary sanctions, that is Phase Zero. Utilizing the border balloons as the justification to neutralize Lukashenko's land corridor, that is Phase Zero. NATO is methodically eliminating the fuel reserves necessary for any tanks rolling out of Kaliningrad and simultaneously sealing the corridor through which those theoretical tanks would advance via Belarus, all before Putin can mass his armored formations at the border. While Putin meticulously prepares for a conventional conflict with the West, Phase Zero has already initiated that conflict, effectively dismantling his entire operational foothold in Europe without deploying a single combatant. As the Russian military machine rots away in Ukraine, NATO's preemptive maneuver simultaneously collapses his most vital Western stronghold and his most strategically crucial ally. What we are observing is the formal obituary reading for the two primary strategic narratives Putin has peddled to the Russian people for decades. The first strategy, Fortress Kaliningrad, is definitively defunct. What has become of the territory Putin called the dagger, aimed at NATO's heart? Its primary fuel conduit has been severed. Its land access has been entirely revoked. It is now utterly reliant on maritime resupply. But can it be supplied by sea? Not practically. Every single Russian oil tanker attempting the run from St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad must navigate the narrow passage through what is now effectively a NATO lake bordered by Finland, Estonia, Sweden, Denmark, Poland, and Germany. That sea route will be under constant surveillance, subject to interdiction at any moment NATO chooses. Kaliningrad is no longer a fortress. It is no longer a dagger. It has become a massive strategic liability for Russia, a landlocked, fuel-starved prison. Putin's Baltic fleet is now effectively neutralized, trapped within its own harbor. This constitutes an unmitigated disaster for Russian military projection planning. The second strategy, the Union State of Russia and Belarus, has met the same fate. What is the current status of Belarus? It is the ally Putin championed as our shield against NATO in the West. Now its borders are hermetically sealed by NATO nations. Its leader is in open panic, begging the West for economic sustenance, only to be publicly spurned. Its economy is collapsing under the weight of isolation. This singular episode proves that the Union State is nothing more than an empty propagandistic construct. Putin cannot even shield his closest, most loyal client from NATO's economic and legal suffocation. Lukashenko's panicked confession on the 31st of October, his plea to open the door, is the final self-incriminating evidence of this total strategic failure. The elites and the common people of Russia are now undeniably aware that their leader lacks the capacity to safeguard either his own sovereign territory, Kaliningrad, or his own ally, Lukashenko. So what is the true measure of NATO's victory here? NATO's triumph is not measured in ordnance expended. Not a single round was fired. Not one single soldier was deployed in aggression. NATO successfully paralyzed both of Putin's critical Western assets, his staging ground, and his political ally, simultaneously using only secondary sanctions, rigorous border controls, and the pretext of smuggling balloons. This is the definitive defeat of 20th century tank and missile warfare against the 21st century's financial and logistical projection of power. To summarize the sheer scale of this operation, we are witnessing the immediate unraveling of Putin's entire strategic engagement with the West. In a mere span of 7 days, NATO, leveraging its new aggressive Phase Zero doctrine, annihilated Putin's operational playing field in Europe. The US levied sanctions on Russian energy titans. Lithuania weaponized those sanctions to choke Kaliningrad's oil supply. Lithuania and Poland, using Lukashenko's own admitted actions as justification, sealed every overland border crossing. The outcome: Putin has zero viable egress points remaining in the West. He gambled on a strategy of divide and conquer. NATO saw the maneuver and enacted a total stranglehold and destroy sequence. Putin's Western Front is not merely eroding. That entire front has been surgically excised. The walls have collapsed. The game in this theater is concluded. What are your immediate thoughts on this masterful display of geopolitical strangulation? Share your analysis in the comments below. To ensure you don't miss our next deep dive into the unfolding global power shift, please subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Thank you for watching.